User quotas. Make sure our recording is running. It is. How many people here use user quotas?
We do.
Okay. Good.
For the home directory.
Team, yeah, when I was with the Boeing team, we used user quotas.
Yeah.
We had to.
We found if we don't use this, then people will do everything in their home directory.
Exactly. Exactly. And best practice, if you use user quotas, is to only enable them on the volumes where you need them and not in other volumes. So you're doing the right thing. Okay. User quota limits provide the storage administrator with a way to distribute storage among users. These user quota limits do not protect the blade set from filling up. Only an undersubscribed set of volume quota limits can provide that protection. The user quota feature basically, the purpose of user quota limits is to provide fairness for user quotas. The feature applies both to individual user and groups. If a file is owned by a user, we say the file's capacity is charged to that user. The file's capacity used is charged only to the file's primary group. The owner's group is not relevant. So users here, we're going to refer to both individual users and to groups. The way the system tracks capacity used by user or group and enforce quotas for each user and group is set by the user quota policy. The system user quota policy is default for all volumes, and you may set separate user quota policies for each volume. Here are the available user quota policies. Disabled. System does not track any data on the capacity used by user or groups. This is the default system policy. Tracked. System tracks, keeps track of the number of files used by each user in the volume, tracks the total capacity used by files in those volumes. It's usually the idea to track user usage before enforcing user quota limits. You kind of want to see what's going to happen to this. Enforced. The quota limits are set by the storage administrator in a limits file. The system enforces hard and soft quota limits for each user in the limits file. The limits file may set soft and hard quotas for the number of files that a file user owns in a volume. This is rare, but we had a situation one customer where a user had hundreds of millions of files, and that was causing problems in a variety of ways. And they thought that perhaps they would set this in the future. And the limits file may set hard and soft limits for the total capacity used by those files for the volume. Here's our policy. We're going to go storage, user and group quotas, policy configuration. This is the system default. You want to use this for the policy that you're going to use on the majority of your volumes. So if you're only going to have user quotas enforced on the home, you probably want to leave this as disabled. There are overrides for every volume. This means that for this volume, this particular volume is going to have a different user quota policy than the system. If you're going to, you do not have to set the policy for every volume if it's going to be the same policy as the system volume. So here we are, we're going to match home star. This is under the situation where we had complex names for homes, scratch, and projects. We want to track those. Put a space delimited for these volumes. Then the display user and quota limit shows this. Here we are. Here's our display. After you set these tracks, you need to change this to star because otherwise it's only going to show the volumes that you specified before. Here we show the display star. You're going to see root disabled regardless of what we put there. There is always a system enforced override for root as disabled, even if the system policy is that we want to make sure we do not have user quotas. The user should not be writing into root anyway, but that causes problems in root, so it's just disabled. We see that home is tracked. There's only one volume that's tracked, but projects tracked, scratched, tracked. The other volumes are not listed here because they do not have overrides. Okay. Here, let's say we here is an example where we had volumes scratch 5 and scratch 6. We asked for scratch star and we saw both of those. This is kind of odd because I've got different volumes here. These examples are shown from different realms at different times. I'll fix that. And there's actually links here to the volumes, volume details. So to remove a user quota policy override from a volume, you don't set it back to the policy, you just set it to inherited. That means that the policy that volume goes back to the system default. This is best practice, so you can change the whole system default if you wish. So inherited, we're getting rid of it policy, the policy override for projects, and you see it is no longer listed there. Yeah. So calculating usage. When the user quota policy on a volume is changed, either tracked or enforced, the storage manager must walk all the objects in a volume to build a user quota database. This is called scanning the volume for user quota usage. The storage manager can only scan one volume at a time. The time that it takes the SM to complete this task depends on the number of objects in the volume and how busy the SM is with PANFS metadata task. While the SM is scanning a volume, the GUI displays calculating user quota and group quota usage in the task in process. The GUI also shows an approximate percentage of the scan that's complete. Scan may cause a slight reduction in metadata performance for all volumes owned by the volume owner director. That's only because the SM is doing stuff. If a volume needs a user usage scan, but is waiting for the SM to complete its scan of another volume, the volume is going to be shown with user and group quota calculation, user usage calculation needed. If the user quota policy is tracked or enforced, the storage manager is updating the user quota database for a volume with every direct flow write. Includes deletions. So here we are, we've got an example here. Here is calculating user quota and group usage, 40%. And we have it on another volume. We know that these two volumes are on managed by different directors because otherwise we would not have user quota usage on both of them. Here is the volume details. We also see the calculating user quota usage right there. We can also see our policy. Where's our policy? Tracked. And if you click edit, that pops you to the other screen where we set the overrides. Here is the information items. For calculating the progress for volume scratch, the quota usage data may not be current. Why? Because we haven't finished our scan. Okay. The databases. The user quota databases are stored in a hidden directory in the root volume named .penfs.userquota. The .penfs, I mean, you can see this with an ls-la, but usually you don't want to see this in your root volume. This directory contains a subdirectory for every volume whose user quota policy is tracked or enforced. Subdirectories are named for the volume ID, not the volume name. And one way to see these is from a directory. We're going to go into service mode, which is always required to access anything in PenFS. We're going to use diagexec, ls-l, PenFS, demo ultra. That's actually not the best way to access this. We can do that. The best way is not to specify PenFS name. It's to use mount quotadb, which is the director's mount point that doesn't specify the realm name, so it can be used regardless of realm name. Here is our output. Here's our user IDs. You don't see these in the GUI, but we can if we do volume list ID. That shows the volume IDs and also the object IDs. So here is our ls-l of our user quota databases, and we can see that under this, we've got subdirectories for volume 2, which is home, volume 4, which is archive, and volume 6, which is not on there. And I believe that we're using data from different realms at different times. You don't really need to see this unless we have a problem with user quotas, in which case we may ask you to delete this, but that's where they are. The GUI provides several ways to see usage for each group, user and group. The detailed reports show usage, quota limits, and percent quota used for each user in each volume. The only show violation shows users who exceeded one or more user quota limits if a limits file has been deployed. The summary shows the total for all of these. You can generate reports for specific users or groups or lists, and users are listed by Unix ID or Windows SIDS if CIFS is enabled. And if a name resolution is enabled, we are going to show the reports with usernames instead of IDs, which is very useful for you, unless if you have more than a handful of users, you're not going to know the IDs. And you may download the user reports in a comma or tab delimited formats. So here, usage report, we're going to show the usage only for users, not groups, and we're going to show the detailed. We're not going to put it violations only, and we're going to show it for all volumes. And we do, in fact, have user name resolution enabled here. So here we show for home, we've got only 4 users that have data in this volume. If we had all our users enabled, we would see all of them. We have the bytes used in gigs, and again, this is the base 1,000 gigs. We do not have a soft quota limit or a hard quota limit. Here's our file limit. We do not have any of these kind of limits. We have not yet deployed a limits file. Here's Scratch, similar volumes. This is all generated in the GUI. It's very nice. So here is the summary, not the detailed. So for the Unix user, we don't have CIFS enabled, so we don't have anything for the Windows users. For the summary, demo 1 has this much data, this many files in all volumes. Okay. Here is For home, you can see total bytes used and the total file count. Usually for the summary, you just want to look at the usage by users. The limits file. The limits file is required to enforce user quota limits. The limits file must be a plain text file with one entry per line. The fields are space delimited. Any fields that contain spaces must be delimited with quotes, and an asterisk may be used as a wildcard. All fields are required except for the email fields. So the fields are, you either say this is a user or a group quota limits. We're going to say either the IDs, either the user ID, the SID, or star. Usually it's star. You can also specify a name if you have name resolution enabled. Volume, either star or a name of the volume. You can, the only glob that we support here is star. You can't do home star or anything like that. The soft quota byte limit, this is the base 10 value. Meg, K, etc. are recognized. Use 0 for unlimited. Hard quota byte limit, same notation. File limit, hard quota limit, these are in numbers. And the email address for violation warnings, this is optional. So here is, again, if this is simple, and usually if you're using Windows quotas, it is not necessary. It depends. If you're only doing it for one volume, and it may be particularly simple. So we're going to, again, go to storage, user quota limits, the limits configuration. And here is the default. It gives you the, it doesn't provide a limit by default, but it gives you commented out the syntax. So here we are, first of all, for users. For all volumes, we're going to set a hard limit of 15 terabyte, soft limit of 15 terabytes, hard limit of 20 terabytes, and 2 million, 3 million files. Then for home, we're going to say all users, 5 terabytes, soft limit, 7 terabytes, hard limit, 1 million, soft quota for the number, 1.5 million, hard quota limit. But we're going to say that UID 107, he's a power user. We're going to need to give him a little, him or her, a little bit more room. So user, we're going to specify this exactly. We're going to specify the volume name exactly. And we're going to give them a stronger one. I would advise you, if you're setting this, to use the actual UIDs. If your name resolution server is down, we do not want the enforcement to be down. It's fine for the reports not to include usernames if for some reason your name resolution server is not available, but you do not want quota limits to be messed up. The limits file is interpreted from the top down, but this is not the same as export. If more than one limits line applies to a specified user and specified file, it is the last limit in the list. So you want to go from general to specific. So here we had users for all volumes. We had users, this particular user for this particular file for UID 1007. This is the line that is going to take effect. If we had this reverse, then, and this was the last line, then this line would be the one that was enforced. Best practice, general limits first, more specific limits after this, because again, it's the last line that applies. All right, so now, here we have specified a usage report, and we see that UID 102 is way over their hard limit. You can see this, and I did this just to for demonstration purposes, if we have this enforced, then all caps and callbacks are going to be recalled for UID 1102, and they will not be able to take out caps and callbacks, because caps and callbacks are being, the user ID is sent along with the IP when the direct flow client requests a callback. Fall count limits are not concerned to most customers, but may be relevant in some situation. Here are our fall counts. Okay. Now we're going to set the enforced policy for home. We want to monitor the use in the scratch volume, so we'll keep it in track policy. The data in the other volumes is not user-oriented, so we won't track the usage by users. Okay. We've warned UID 2000-10002 to delete data or persuade another user to take ownership of some of it. If we think UID's usage is justified, we could raise that user's limit. Here we are. We're going to go to enforced. Okay. Now we show our overrides. We see, again, as always, the policy is disabled for root, it is enforced for home, and it's tracked for scratch. In this case, we have sys enabled, name resolution, so we have the names and we have the Windows domain and the user IDs. And we have this. We do have name cross protocol name resolution enabled, so we know that these are the same users. Unix group wheel, that is because FreeBSD says the group for group 0 is wheel, not root. We have users, again, matching groups. If we had more than one group in the demo realm, we would see different groups. And quota, this is very nice. A user may check their user quota usage from a direct flow client with pan quota. If run by a non-root user, pan quota returns the user's usage in the volume that the current working directory is in. So here I am demo line 9 on this client. I'm going to CD into PanFS Ultra Home demo 9. And I'm going to run user local bin pan quota. If this is in my path, I can just run pan quota. And it shows me my usage, my limits, my files, my limits, the path to the volume, and my identity. Again, we have cross protocol name resolution enabled, so it knows that demo 9 is both demo 9, which is user ID 1009, and this particular SID. However, these files are not charged to the SID. I don't believe we support user quota values for SIDs. I need to check that. The root user may get the usage data for any user with the U option. So here I am as root and in the same directory. And if I run this without user, it's just going to report the usage for root, but I'm using the user demo 9, so I can find the demo 9 user usage. Again, it reports it for the volume where the current working directory is. Some notes. If the user exceeds the hard-coded limit user, this is the same deal as with the volume hard quotas. The user's capacity must drop to 5% below the limit before the storage manager will allow the user to write data to the volume. This is to prevent hard quota violation thrashing. The storage manager has no way to check its ongoing calculation of how much capacity should be charged to a user. That's for a volume. Anytime the volumes are quizzed, the storage manager goes and asks the OSDs, how much data do you store for each of these volumes, so it can check how much it's calculated the usage is for each volume. That is not true for the users. The only way it knows how much usage is charged to a particular user is its ongoing calculations. It scans and then it keeps updating based on the client reads and writes. We have only seen this one time recently, but occasionally the storage manager can make a mistake and get off. If the user thinks that usage charged to him is too much, check with PAN-DU. This calculates the usage. Actually, we have seen this once recently. If it's off, and you're pretty sure it's off, the only corrective action is to disable user quotas on the volume, wait about 5 minutes, set the policy back to tracked and enforced. Storage manager deletes all the volumes, rescans the volumes. During this rescan, the users may be able to exceed their hard quotas, since the SM may not have charged them with all their usage yet. The volume undergoes FSRC. The user quota database is validated, and again, the SM must rescan the value. FSRC is going to be walking all the objects, checking the attributes. We assume that maybe some capacity used may be changed, so we're going to invalidate this. You have to rescan. Each director runs SQLite software to access the user quota database. The software is usually reliable, but if the SQ software hangs and the user quota database policy for a volume is enforced or tracked, the storage manager will not be able to allow any writes to the volumes. This is very easy to diagnose. There will be tons and tons of PAN SQLite and user quota errors in the volume owner logs. The corrective action is usually to restart the PAN manager service on the director that manages the root volume, or reboot the volume with the hung SQLite process. Usually you want Panas's technical support to help you with this. In rare situations where there is actually something wrong with the user quota database, we may have to disable the quota bases, manually delete the user quota database and the root volume, and then change the override policy back to promote a rescan. This is very, very rare, but again, the logs are very, very specific. I cannot open this database. There is something wrong with it. We mistakenly had to do this once. It turned out that the problem was that after the upgrade, that SQLite was not working correctly. We just had to reboot a director and everything was good. And again, the only time we have seen this recently was right after an upgrade. SM holds the relevant limits, files, and recent values from the user quota database in memory, so it doesn't have to access the user quota database for every client write. It also stores these values in the transaction logs, so if it restarts, it is able to read the transaction logs that, from NVDIM and commit any changes that it made to the user quota database. Review. Are user quota limits an effective way to prevent the blade set from filling up?
No.
No. What are the 3 system user quota policies?
Oh, none tracked and enforced or
Exactly.
disabled.
That's
Yeah.
right. You'll recognize them when you see it. I'm looking for ideas here. If you in the GUI, you just click the right button. In Pancli, if you type in none, it's going to error out and it's going to tell you what your choices are. If a file's capacity use is a file's capacity use charged both to the file owner and to each of the groups that the owner belongs to.
Yes,
No.
I would think. No?
No.
Is it just the file
Group
owner?
membership can be changed all over where it is the file's primary group.
Hmm.
Okay. Figuring out which of the groups that the file owner belongs to would be a huge big thing. The so it is just the file's primary group, and there is no way to specify a secondary group for file. It's just we've got a file owner, we've got a file group as attributes for every object in PNFS, just like all file systems do. Okay. That clear? And I asked that because this is frequently misunderstood. If the storage administrator does not want the same user policy to apply to all volumes, must he or she set the user quota policy for each volume in the realm?
No.
Oh.
You can have a default and then
That's right. Exactly. Default, and then some specific overrides. How is a user quota policy volume override removed?
I feel like this is a trick question. You go remove it.
No. I
Or
mean, there's no delete.
Do you set it to inherited?
That's right. You set it to inherited.
Okay.
Not a trick policy. I don't ask trick questions. Now, there may be some questions that you feel are tricked, and in which case, I'm willing to listen. But I'm saying I phrased it this way because in your mind, you're going to say, I want to remove this policy. So how do I do it? I'm going to set it to inherited. What process is responsible for tracking per user usage for each volume?
storage manager?
That's right. Storage manager. What type of per usage data does this process keep if the user quota policy is disabled?
None.
None. Very good. The user quota policy is enforced. By the way, This is some significant load on the SM to keep doing this. I would recommend that if you don't care about the per usage data for a volume, that the policy should be disabled for those volumes. I mean, if you care, that's fine. The storage manager is resilient enough to keep up with it, but this just does put some load on the storage manager. If the user quota policy is enforced, what happens to the user quota database for the volume if the policy is changed to tracked?
Nothing.
Nothing. There actually is just a little entry, what the policy is, but all the entries for the users are nothing. If the user quota policy for the volume is tracked or enforced, and the policy is changed to disabled for 5 minutes or less, can the storage manager pick up where it left off with the user quota database values?
Yes.
No. Think
I
about
thought if
that.
it was underneath.
No, if you disable it at all,
Okay. I
it's
just
gone.
remember the thing saying that you wait 5 minutes and then turn it back on to
that's
reset
just,
it. So I thought maybe there was
that's
a.
just because to let the storage manager pick up.
Okay. I thought maybe there was.
I will clarify that
timeout.
if this is confusing. This is supposed to be a joke. This is like the cookie on the floor.
Ah,
If you disable it at all, it's gone.
okay.
And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure that this is even worth it. I'll remove the time thing. I mean, even I don't even enjoy that as much anymore. I'll clarify that to make sure it's not confusing with the other value. If the user quality for a volume is changed from disabled to enforced, can hard quota limits be reliably enforced immediately?
No.
No,
No, because storage manager is not going to have the usage for the user until the scan is complete. The
Right,
further
that's-
the scan is along, the more reliably these can be enforced. What happens if the user quota policy for a volume is enforced, but no limits file has been deployed?
Is it equivalent to tracking?
Yeah. Exactly. It's tracked, but there's going to be no enforcement. What happens if the user quota policy for a volume is enforced, but the volume is not mentioned in the limits file? Should say explicitly or implicitly.
So the same thing? It'll just act as tracked?
That's right, stacked as tracked. If more than one line in the limits file applies to a specified user in a specified volume, which line does the system use?
the last line in which it's listed in the limits file.
That's right. The last one that applies to the user. Very good. If a user has exceeded his or her hard quota in a volume, what percent below the user's hard quota limit must the user's usage in that volume be before the user is allowed to write data in the volume?
5%?
5%. Very good. Questions on this topic?
Actually, yeah, I'm sorry, I do have one.
Mhm.
It just says that whenever the scan starts, it can take a while and a state is presented. Is there any indication as to like how far along a scan is
Yes.
or okay.
Yes. In the GUI, it shows the percent.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's all right. There you go. See,
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Hey,
other
Linda,
questions?
is it possible to like schedule scans?
No,
Like, okay, just when you would make a change and then that gets kicked off at the time that a change is made.
that's right.
Okay,
And by the way, the recovery priority does not govern the scans. It's going to scan the volume with the lowest user ID, group ID first. And it's possible that it should cover the scans, but I mean, the storage manager is listing the objects in object ID order, therefore it's working on the volume that it manages with the lowest user ID first. Yeah, and it kicks off immediately after you either toggle the policy from disabled to one of the other policies, or after FSRC has completed on a volume. Okay, those are good questions. Any others? Okay. We are in uncharted territory. We have finished with today's topics with a whopping hour left. Usually, we're not finished and this is spilled over into day 10. So I don't have any labs on this. So when we're going to take our break, and when we come back, we're going to wing it on a lab. Well done on everybody for finishing things on time. Okay, let's come back at 12 after the hour.